Welcome to May Equipped Live. My name is Jackie. I'll be walking us through this program. Greg, hello, and thank you for being here and being willing to answer some of these questions.
Well, thanks, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone.
I also wanted to just say before we start, that was very generous of the second or the duplicate payroll for the week during the ice storm. So it was very generous, and I think I can say this on behalf of all of the IFMC employees. Thank you for that.
Well, and I'd like to thank everyone for all the extra effort. That was certainly unexpected, but just a tremendous effort, and it's a show of loyalty to the organization, and it really helped. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we could dig into the core values and show examples of every single one of them that was demonstrated during that time. So it was cool to watch that all come together. But we are going to ask some more questions today, not just talk about the ice storm. I think everyone's tired of the ice storm discussions. And I hinted at, and you kind of already answered this one in the last Equipped Live, but I want you to talk a little more about it. But the question was submitted by EVI, Ken Rittaller's group, and it was which of the 7 habits resonates with you the most on a personal level? So for those who are watching, if you don't know what the 7 habits is, when we say that, we're talking about a book. So the 7 habits of highly effective, highly successful people. So which one resonates with you the most?
Well, like I kind of blurted out at the end of the last session, for me, I think sharpen the saw is probably the one that makes the most sense or that I've applied the most. But all those habits are really good, and I think it depends on just what the circumstances are, which one might be better applicable to any given situation. But I think the real superpower is the synergy of all of those habits. And so, if you look at synergy as 1 + 1 is 3, I really think you can achieve that synergy with more of those habits. And so what I've been striving to do is to incorporate and really get good with more and more of those habits. And I think the highest performers are the folks that have mastered maybe not all 7, but maybe 4, 5, 6 of those. And the more you can master, the more you can apply in a given situation. I think the ramifications of that or the consequences of that are way more than any one habit. But with that said, the reason I like sharpen the saw is, and I didn't even know that the book existed when I made some of the choices that I made. But I think not only my words but my actions kind of show the sharpen the saw habit, and that is back when I had to make a choice of whether or not I went to a 4-year university or stuck with the business. I made a promise to myself that I would stick with the business, but I would study 1 hour a day for the rest of my life. And that studying, like I say, I didn't realize how that aligned with Stephen Covey's 7 habits because I didn't even know about those. But that one choice, I think, has been pretty significant for me because I've continually sharpened the saw, if you will, and it's just become a habit for me.
So are you still doing that 1 hour a day?
I am, and
Excellent.
sometimes more. So today, the thing I was studying was extreme economic systems, which is really interesting. And those go anywhere from what's called anarcho-capitalism to state socialism and or communism, which those are different things, but interesting stuff.
Yeah, that is not what I was studying today, but it does sound very interesting. And for the viewers, I was just looking at my bookshelf. I have the 7 habits of highly effective people, and then there's also the next one is the 8th habit. So if anybody does want to look at those, they can follow up with that second book as well.
You know,
Um,
one other comment here, Jackie. The other thing that I've done is that I've only done this recently, but I've actually enrolled in the Peterson Academy. And Peterson Academy is an online school, and they have phenomenal courses. And I just started to study now is the fundamentals of physiology, which has to do with human body and the organs and how all that stuff works. But that's that's some pretty good stuff, and anybody can do that.
mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there, and if people want to learn, what's the word that describes a self-learner? You use this term frequently.
Uh, Autodidactic.
Right. So people want to learn and be an autodidactic, which is a very valuable way to be. There's so many resources, but I just wrote that down, Peterson Academy, because I'd like to look into that as well. So thank you. The next question is really flows well with this one, but same team, Ken Ritaller's team. What qualities make someone fit to be a great and effective leader?
Well, I think maybe some of my comments from before apply here, where I don't know that there's necessarily one thing, but I think there's maybe synergy amongst a number of them. And certainly one of those, in my mind, would be trustworthiness. And so if you develop the habit of repeatedly making and keeping promises, that's really what trust is. You know, trust is when you know that if somebody makes a commitment, they're going to follow through. And anybody can do that on a day-to-day basis with little things. And if you can do it with little things, you can do it with bigger things. So I think trustworthiness is a really big one. I think you need to have a purpose, and you need to know where you want to go, and you need to be able to communicate that vision effectively. I think history has shown that in a clean system, if you will, or in a clean organization, and what I mean by clean is where you don't have maybe unethical or other activities going on that aren't right. Typically, in any organization throughout history, the most competent people tend to get informally, but then also formally, uh, elevated into leadership roles. And that's just kind of how it works. And it's because typically the competent people remember what the purpose of the organization is. They solve the problems that organization was formed for in the first place. Other folks recognize that it's actually working, and so they start to follow that person. And of course, if they follow that person, that means that person must be a leader. And so that, but the following, I think, if we go back to the question of great and effective, those followers need to be following voluntarily, not because they're forced to do it. And now that you've got the followers, now how does a leader organize that team? And one of the analogies that I like to use is a baseball team. If you make the right choices of which people are playing first base, second base, shortstop, etc., that isn't always the most popular, and people need to realize what the role is, but that set of choices around what role people play is a really significant one. So the great leaders are able to do all of those things and have people voluntarily follow.
So I've heard you say before, lead by example. Um, so is there, so we can do that, people can lead, do the right things, have a vision, lead people, but is there value beyond just leading by example and also talking about your why and talking about why you make the decision you do, or is leading by example enough without that additional explanation and discussion about it with your team?
Well, I think that's maybe application specific, but if you don't if you don't need a large organization to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, then certainly leading by example, where you don't necessarily communicate with words, but you communicate with your actions, that can work really, really well. The the verbal communications, the other types of communication start becoming really important when the organization starts getting larger, and now you need to lead through another set of leaders. And so in the military, there used to be a kind of a rule of thumb where essentially for every 10 people there was one leader, and isn't that isn't written in stone, but in general there's kind of a 10-to-1 ratio there. And that, with modern technology, modern communications, that has expanded now to a larger group number. I think the average now in a lot of larger companies is maybe up closer to 15, 1 to 15. But and again, that depends on what the work is. That is not something we can just apply across the board. But if your group starts getting, let's say, larger than 10 to 15, now as a leader, you really need to start behaving differently than the rest of the team. And so if you're simply doing the same work that everyone else is doing, the administrative work isn't going to be getting done. And so you really need to start behaving different. Once you start behaving different, you pretty much need to communicate verbally why you're doing things differently than everyone else. And that really sorts out the leaders who can lead through other leaders versus leading direct individual contributors. And matter of fact, one of the things that I hope we're still doing, and what I used to do, is I would typically put a team of guys together, maybe 3, 4 guys. I'd watch who was just informally the go-to person out of that team. I'd elevate that person to a leadership role where I recognized that they were a leader. Their team now knew that they were named as a leader. And sometimes that changed people. That title, that power changed their behavior, and it wasn't good for them. But if they survived that well, then I'd try to push their team up to 10, 15 people and see how they handle their need to behave differently and how they explained that. And if they were able to explain that and still get good results, those are the folks that tended to now be leaders of other leaders and eventually business unit leaders. So hopefully we're still doing that.
That makes a lot of sense. And leading from a place of ego or power is never a good place to lead from. So I've seen that. I don't like that. We are going to squeeze one more question in here, also from Ken Rittaller and teams. And it's similar to other questions we've asked before, but I think it's a little different. Knowing what you do now, is there anything you would have changed in the past regarding the IFMC? So I think the question aims at having done something differently along the way because of what you've learned.
I'm sorry, Jackie, have I changed anything or would I change anything?
Would you have changed anything? Like if you could go back and redo, is there anything you would change knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I'd hire more Ken Rittaller. But
Hopefully.
that's not, I won't make that specifically Ken, because Ken plays one role on the team very, very well. But we have some really outstanding team members, and if I look at what's one thing I could have done different to get substantially better results, it would have been somehow figuring out how to clone our top performers. And of course, I won't say that's why I'm studying physiology right now, but I guess that.
I hope not.
But certainly, I think I would have, if I would have realized that earlier, I probably would have been working harder to develop or help develop more competency in that regard. But there's just not one thing other than that I controlled that I can think of that would have made a significant difference.
Well, that and whatever you are now is a culmination or combination of everything that has happened. So even if maybe it could have been done differently, there were lessons learned that maybe had to have been learned. So that's a tough question to answer, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are over time because that's how we usually do it on Equipped Live. Just a little bit over. We did set the next date for June 16th, so I will be getting that out, an email out. I feel like we have better attendance live when I do send the email out that day, so I might not send it out till the day of, just to kind of test that theory. But there will be an email going out for the June 16th date, 6 p.m. That being said, Greg, any final comments?
Maybe the last question was what I would have done differently or what I would have changed. The one thing that I would continue to do and am continuing to do is always striving to make today just a little bit better than yesterday. And it's amazing, you do that for a few thousand days and you're old, but it gets better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes right back to the 7 habits question, is sharpening the saw a little bit every day. Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, Greg, as always, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy guy. We appreciate it. And we will see everybody else, or we'll see everybody again on June 16th.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.